And then the seventh leads us into the seventh step, which is we humbly ask God to remove our defects of character. It's another prayer. It's in the book. I've heard it described as the third step prayer with teeth. Basically, it's the same idea, it's a little stronger. And that's literally all I'm doing, is I'm asking God to remove all these defects of character. So I say that prayer at the end of my hour of meditation, and then I'm done. I walk out. And there's a whole bunch of promises that it talks about what after that happens in my experience. My experience with the Big Book is simply this, is when I did everything the book told me to do exactly when the book told me to do it, there were also some really extravagant promises that said would come, and those all came. Right. In different order sometimes in my own personal way, but they came. And with some reflection and hindsight, I realized they all came. Right.
And then I got down on my knees and I said the seventh step prayer, which is, my Creator, I'm now knowing that you should have all of me, both good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. I got up and I left and I started going about my business.
Right.
So
simple as that.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dramatic clouds parting in the sky. Anything
nope.
Like that? Just simple.
Yeah, but I was okay. I mean, there was this odd. It almost felt like nothing had happened, and yet I wasn't anxious and I wasn't thinking about all that stuff that I'd just read. I wasn't worried about what the person thought of me who I'd read it to. Right. Mostly, if anything, I was a little bit embarrassed that I'd taken up 6 hours of her time with saying basically the same thing over and over. Right. But on the whole, I mean, I wasn't really worried about what was going to happen to me next, and I had been really worried about that. You know, I didn't know what was going to go on in my life outside the step work. So just kind of was suddenly had a sense of peace. But other than that, nothing special.
So I meditate, you know, spend an hour alone with God. And at the end of the hour of meditation, I humbly ask Him to remove my shortcomings. I got down on my knees and I said the seventh-step prayer. Seventh-step prayer is an interesting prayer. You know, the goal of this process isn't to make me perfect. It is to make me better. But in the seventh-step prayer it says, you know, I ask Him to remove from me all those qualities that stand in the way of my usefulness to God and to others. You know, it's not about making me something other than human. You know, and I may still make mistakes, and some of my shortcomings may need to be addressed again in the future. You know, or I may retain qualities in degrees, but in degrees that will serve some useful purpose. I don't get to know God, you know, God's purpose. You know, but He takes it, you know. So this doesn't make me someone who can't make mistakes. But it does make me someone who I'm no longer afraid to make mistakes. You know, I do my best, and if I make mistakes, then I have to trust that they're for some purpose, whether it's for me to learn a lesson that comes of it or for someone else to learn a lesson that comes of it. Sometimes I get to know what the purpose was, sometimes I don't. But a lot of the time when I look back, I see that as a result of things not going the way I meant for them to go, something much better has come of it. But in any event, when all this is over, and I've done steps 5, 6, and 7, I do them in one day. I did them in one day. I mean, I suppose if I had like a 36-hour inventory, I might take a break. But when I go out, I'm different. And, you know, immediately on leaving the room where I did all that stuff, I couldn't tell you quite how. It's more like, okay, what's different? You know, I don't think God's role in my life is to prevent me from ever having to suffer, but one of the things that having God in my life does for me is that he carries that portion of my burden that's too much for me to carry myself. So I walked out and I couldn't tell what the hell was different for a few days, but I found myself dealing with people that I had written inventory about, resentments about, and realizing that I no longer felt that. And I found myself, I had a great experience actually. A couple days after I read my inventory, I had fear of spiders on my inventory. And I don't know, they just made me real uncomfortable. And the place where I was staying, there was this back porch. It's in a rural setting, and there's this back porch, and it was like late summer. And the eaves that overhung the back porch where the women were staying that were at the facility there it was. Thousands and thousands of spiders had hatched. And they were all over the porch. And one of the women came running over and said, "Will you help us? Will you help us? Will you help us?" And my old response would have been to run for a can of Raid, or to stomp the living daylights out of them, or to get someone else to do it for me, more likely. And I couldn't help but laugh that I was being asked to do this, but I realized I feel perfectly fine, and I went and I grabbed a broom and I gently swept them into the grass. It looked like arachnophobia back there, and I was just fine. It's really strange. So seeing what this had done for me kind of, at first was in really, small ways, but undeniably something had changed.
There's an experience. There's all these experiences in here. That's the really interesting, Tom, my sponsee Tom, he likes to say that the steps gave him an experience that he couldn't doubt. He had a spiritual experience. He could not doubt it. You could doubt it, but he can't doubt his own experience. And that's really kind of what the steps are doing every step of the way, is they're giving you your own experiences, which will determine the course of your belief, which is very different than I buy into a belief system and then I try to have, the experiences that are dictated by that belief system. I've often heard of a religious studies professor get really adamant that, this thing you hear out there in pop culture, which is you can be spiritual and not religious, is impossible. And yet I really question that, because I think that the 12 steps can, yes, they're religious, there's a religious origin to them. The practices themselves are deeply religious, but they are divorced from any kind of religious context, and they're really practiced in this sort of theological void, for the most part. Of course, that's not entirely true, but so anyway, you do this and you walk out of there and you have this experience, and this experience will dictate, where you take this thing. I had a tremendous experience after steps 5, 6, and 7 where I felt I didn't even expect to feel as changed as I did. And I walked around in kind of an altered state for a day or two.